Picture this. You're bound naked in a public square, surrounded by jeering crowds. The executioner approaches with curved blades, gleaming in the sunlight. Your skin is about to be peeled away, inch by agonizing inch, while you're still breathing. This wasn't a nightmare. This was the brutal reality that ended the life of Apostle Bartholomew. And what you're about to discover will shake you to your core. The screams that echoed through that ancient square still haunt history books today. But the story behind those screams, that's where things get truly terrifying. Bartholomew wasn't just another follower. He was one of the 12, handpicked by Christ himself. While others spread the gospel to familiar territories, Bartholomew ventured into the darkest corners of the ancient world: Armenia, India, Mesopotamia. Places where Christianity was not just unwelcome, it was a death sentence waiting to happen. Born in Cana of Galilee, the same town where Jesus performed his first miracle, Bartholomew witnessed the impossible becoming possible. He saw water transform into wine, the dead rise to life, and the lame walk again. But Bartholomew didn't just preach. He performed miracles that left entire communities stunned. The blind could see. The lame walked. Demons fled at the mention of his master's name. And most dangerously of all, he converted the powerful. By 68 AD, Bartholomew had traveled thousands of miles from his homeland. The Roman Empire was tightening its grip on distant territories, but something even more dangerous was spreading: the Christian faith. In the kingdom of Armenia, nestled between the Black and Caspian Seas, Bartholomew arrived carrying nothing but a leather satchel containing fragments of scripture and an unshakable faith that would soon cost him everything. The Armenia of that time was a crossroads of ancient religions. Zoroastrian fire temples burned alongside shrines to Greek gods. Roman deities mingled with local spirits. Into this complex religious landscape walked a man who claimed there was only one true God. What happened next would change everything. King Ptolemus himself began showing interest in Bartholomew's teachings. Not just polite curiosity, genuine spiritual hunger. The royal court was divided. Noble families started abandoning their ancient gods. Lady Volusiana, the king's sister, was among the first converts. When she publicly declared her faith and destroyed her collection of golden idols, the shockwaves reached every corner of the kingdom. The pagan priests watched in horror as their influence crumbled. Their temples emptied. Their sacrifices were ignored. Their lucrative positions were threatened, and they knew exactly who was responsible. High priest Baal Shamin called an emergency council. "This foreign sorcerer must be stopped," he declared to his assembled colleagues. "Before he destroys everything our ancestors built, this foreign sorcerer must die," whispered Astyages, the king's own brother, to the high priests in the shadow of their temple. "Before he destroys everything we've built." The plan was simple but deadly. They would accuse Bartholomew of treason against the gods, a crime punishable by the most excruciating death imaginable. But Astyages had a personal motive. He had been next in line for certain privileges and honors that his brother was now considering granting to Christian converts. The apostles' influence threatened not just their religion but his political future. For weeks they gathered evidence. Every miracle was reframed as sorcery. Every conversion was labeled as corruption of the state. Every prayer was twisted into sedition against the established order. They bribed servants in the royal household to report Bartholomew's private conversations. They planted spies among new converts to gather incriminating statements. The web of conspiracy grew tighter around the unsuspecting apostle. The trap was sprung by someone Bartholomew trusted. Judas, a recent convert who had appeared eager to spread the faith, had been bought by the priests. For 30 pieces of silver, the same price as his master's betrayal, he revealed Bartholomew's location and daily routines. "Master," Judas said, approaching Bartholomew as he prayed beside a mountain stream, "the priests have agreed to hear your teachings. They want to understand this new faith." Bartholomew's eyes showed no suspicion, only joy. "Then we must go to them immediately. Perhaps the Holy Spirit is working in their hearts." It happened at dawn. just as Bartholomew finished his morning prayers. He was kneeling beside the stream, his hands raised toward heaven, when armed guards burst from the surrounding bushes. No trial, no defense, just iron shackles and a march toward inevitable doom. The guards were unnecessarily rough, dragging him through thorny bushes, striking him with their spear butts, spitting on his torn robes. They had been ordered to make him appear as bedraggled and pitiful as possible. "Where is your God now, Bartholomew?" Astyages sneered as the apostle was dragged before the assembled crowd in the central square. "Let's see if he can save you from what's coming." Bartholomew's response chilled the air. "I do not fear those who kill the body but cannot touch the soul. My God sees everything, including the darkness in your heart." The mockery of justice. The trial was theater, bloody, twisted theater designed to terrify any other Christians watching. Astyages had spent days preparing his performance, rehearsing his accusations, gathering witnesses who would swear to whatever lies he needed. The crowd had been carefully assembled. Paid agitators were scattered throughout to ensure the right responses at the right moments. Roman soldiers stood at strategic points, their hands resting on their sword hilts. Citizens of Armenia. Astyages stood before the assembled crowd, his voice booming across the square. "This man has poisoned our king's mind. He has turned our people against the gods who have protected us for centuries." He gestured dramatically toward Bartholomew, who stood bloodied but unbowed between his guards. "He claims our ancestors were fools. He says our temples are houses of demons. He promises eternal life to those who abandon the ways of their fathers." One by one, Astyages presented his witnesses. A merchant claimed Bartholomew had cursed his business. A mother swore the apostle had bewitched her son. A priest testified that the sacred fires had dimmed since Bartholomew's arrival. Each accusation was met with roars of approval from the planted agitators, which gradually infected the genuine crowd members. Fear and anger spread like wildfire through the assembled masses. "But perhaps," Astyages continued with mock reasonableness, "this foreign dog simply doesn't understand our ways. Perhaps he can be educated." He approached Bartholomew directly, speaking loudly enough for all to hear. "Bow before the statue of our God, kiss the feet of mighty Baal shaman, and renounce this Christian madness. Do this, and you may leave our lands unharmed." Bartholomew looked directly into Astyages' eyes, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent square. "I bow only to the one true God who created heaven and earth. Your idol is nothing but stone and metal, powerless to save even itself." Then he did something that stunned everyone present. He began to pray, not for rescue, not for mercy, but for his persecutors. "Father, open their eyes to see your truth. Soften their hearts to receive your love." The crowd's murmur turned ugly. How dare this foreign prisoner show such arrogance? How dare he pray to his God in their sacred square? What punishment does such blasphemy deserve? Astyages roared. The crowd's response was deafening. "Death, death, death." But Astyages raised his hand, a cruel smile playing across his lips. "Death is too quick for this crime. This man will learn what happens when you mock the gods of Armenia." The sentence Bartholomew of Galilee, Astyages declared with theatrical solemnity. "You have been found guilty of sorcery, blasphemy, and treason against the divine order. Your punishment will match your crimes in severity." The square fell silent, as executioners wheeled forward a collection of implements that made even hardened soldiers pale. "You will be skinned alive. Your flesh will be peeled from your body while you breathe. Your skin will be displayed as a warning to any who would follow your path. Only when you renounce your false god will we grant you the mercy of a quick death." The crowd fell completely silent. Even in an age of brutal public executions, this was extreme. Children were hurried away by their parents. Even some of the planted agitators looked uncomfortable. But Bartholomew stood unmoved, his eyes fixed on something beyond the jeering faces surrounding him. Those who stood closest later swore they saw him smile. They stripped him naked in the center of the square, not just to humiliate but to make every inch of skin visible to the executioners. The crowd pressed closer, some morbidly curious, others horrified but unable to look away. Roman soldiers formed a loose perimeter, as much to contain the crowd as to prevent any rescue attempt. The executioner's assistants began setting up their grisly workshop in full view of hundreds of witnesses. Wooden posts were driven deep into the ground with heavy mallets. The sound of wood-splitting stone echoed across the square like thunder. Ropes were tested for strength, knots examined for security. Every detail was designed for maximum psychological impact. This wasn't just an execution, it was a public demonstration of what happened to those who challenged the established order. The instruments of horror. The executioner approached carrying tools that made the crowd gasp. Curved flaying knives, sharpened to razor precision. Each blade designed for one purpose: to separate skin from muscle with surgical accuracy. There were hooks for lifting separated skin, clamps for holding it taut, and thin blades for the most delicate work around joints and facial features. The executioner had clearly done this before. He examined each tool carefully, testing edges against his thumb, adjusting grips, making sure everything was perfect. This wasn't butchery, it was craft, horrible and precise. Behind him, braziers burned with coals to heat the blades. Hot metal would cauterize wounds, preventing blood loss that might grant unconsciousness too quickly. The torture was designed to last hours, not minutes. "Last chance, Christian," Astyages called out, his voice carrying false mercy. "Bow to our gods, kiss the sacred stone, and I'll make this quick. A single sword stroke, and your suffering ends." The crowd held its breath. Surely no one could face such torture willingly. Surely survival instinct would overcome religious conviction. Bartholomew's voice carried across the silent square, clear and strong despite his wounds. "My flesh you may destroy, but my spirit belongs to the eternal God. Do what you will to this temporary vessel." Then he added something that chilled even his executioners. "I thank you for allowing me to share in my master's sufferings. Today I will be with him in paradise." Rope cut into Bartholomew's wrists as they bound him spread-eagle between the posts, completely exposed and helpless. The positioning was calculated. Arms extended to stretch the skin taut, legs apart to provide access to every part of his body. The executioner tested the bonds, ensuring they would hold under the most violent struggling. He had seen men tear themselves free in their agony, and he was determined this would not happen here. Additional ropes secured Bartholomew's ankles, waist, and neck. By the time they finished, he could barely move, suspended between the posts, like a grotesque scarecrow. The crowd pressed closer, forming a tight circle around the execution site. Some had brought stools to get a better view. Others held their children on their shoulders. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and dread. The lamina. The executioner approached slowly, his primary blade gleaming in the afternoon sun. He had heated it until it glowed red, then let it cool to the perfect temperature, hot enough to sear, cold enough to cut cleanly. "Last words?" he asked quietly, his voice almost gentle. Even executioners sometimes showed unexpected mercy in their final moments. Bartholomew looked up at the sky, his voice carrying clearly. "Into your hands, Lord, I commit my spirit. Use my suffering to strengthen those who will come after me." The blade touched his shoulder. A thin line of crimson appeared as the crowd held its collective breath. Then the real horror began. Slowly, methodically, the executioner began peeling away strips of skin. The technique was precise, deep enough to separate flesh, shallow enough to keep vital organs intact. He had learned his craft through years of practice on condemned criminals. What made this torture so horrific wasn't just the pain, it was the skill involved. The executioner worked like a surgeon, each cut calculated to maximize suffering while preserving life. He started with the shoulders where the skin was thick and strong. Long strips came away like leather being peeled from a hide. Blood flowed but not heavily. The heated blade cauterized as it cut. Bartholomew's jaw clenched, but no scream escaped his lips. This only enraged his torturers more. The crowd began, shouting for him to cry out, to beg, to show some sign of breaking. Instead, something unprecedented happened. As more skin was removed, revealing raw, bleeding muscle beneath, Bartholomew began to pray, not for rescue, but for his executioners. "Father, forgive them," he whispered through gritted teeth, his voice somehow still audible in the hushed square. "They know not what they do." The executioner paused, his blade hovering over Bartholomew's chest. In 30 years of professional torture, he had never heard a victim pray for his tormentors. It was unsettling, unnatural. Some in the crowd began weeping. Others turned away, unable to watch anymore. But the torture continued, driven by Astyages' increasingly frantic commands. The work moved to Bartholomew's arms. Here the process was more complex, as the executioner had to work around muscles and tendons while keeping the limbs functional. Long strips of skin were carefully separated and peeled back, leaving raw flesh exposed to the air. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky as the executioner worked with methodical precision, removing skin from arms, chest, back. Medical knowledge of the time was limited, but they knew exactly how to inflict maximum pain while keeping their victim conscious. Blood pooled in the dust below, attracting flies that added to the horror. The stench of exposed flesh and hot metal filled the air. Yet Bartholomew remained upright, supported only by the ropes binding him to the posts. His breathing was labored but steady. His eyes, though clouded with pain, remained clear and focused on something beyond the material world around him. By the time the sun reached its peak, most of Bartholomew's torso had been flayed. The executioner was sweating heavily, exhausted by the precision required for such prolonged work. Something extraordinary was happening in the crowd. What had begun as bloodthirsty entertainment was transforming into something else entirely. The apostle's refusal to break, his continued prayers for his tormentors, his obvious peace despite unimaginable pain, it was having an effect no one had anticipated. Mothers covered their children's eyes. Men who had come to mock found themselves questioning their own beliefs. Even some of the paid agitators fell silent, overwhelmed by what they were witnessing. A Roman centurion, hardened by years of warfare, was heard to mutter, "Surely this man is righteous. What God gives such strength to his followers?" By the time the executioner reached Bartholomew's face, preparing to complete his grisly work, the apostle's body was a map of exposed muscle and sinew. His breathing was shallow but determined, his pulse visible in the arteries of his neck. Astyages approached, his earlier confidence replaced by something approaching fear. The day had not gone as planned. Instead of breaking the Christian movement, he seemed to be creating a martyr before his eyes. "Surely you must renounce this madness now," he said, his voice uncertain for the first time. "No God is worth this suffering. Just say the words and this ends." Bartholomew's voice was barely a whisper, but every word carried across the silent square. "Into your hands, Lord, I commit my spirit. Let my death be a bridge for others to find your truth." Then something extraordinary happened. Despite everything, despite the unimaginable pain and the horrific mutilation of his body, Bartholomew smiled. Not a grimace of pain or a rictus of death, a genuine smile of peace and joy. "I see him," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the sky above. "I see my master waiting for me. The pain is nothing compared to the glory that awaits." The executioner, perhaps moved by mercy or simply exhausted by the horror he had inflicted, drew a long blade across Bartholomew's throat. The suffering finally ended, but the impact was only beginning. As the apostle's body went limp against the ropes, a strange silence fell over the square. No cheers of victory, no celebration of justice served. Only stunned, uncomfortable quiet. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. The aftermath. The crowd dispersed in stunned silence. Many who had come to mock left questioning everything they believed. The executioner himself, according to historical accounts, refused payment and later converted to Christianity. Even Astyages was shaken. The man who had ordered this brutal death reportedly suffered nightmares for the rest of his life, haunted by the memory of Bartholomew's peaceful smile in the midst of unthinkable torture. King Polemius, when he learned of his brother's actions, was furious. He had the apostles' remains collected and buried with honor, and several accounts suggest he completed his own conversion to Christianity shortly after. They thought they were destroying him. Instead, they made him immortal. The skin they tore away became a banner of unshakable faith that has inspired millions across 2 millennia. As the dust settled in that Armenian square so long ago, one truth remained. They could flay his flesh, they could spill his blood, they could silence his voice, but they could never touch the soul that had already transcended their earthly torments. The apostle who had his skin torn off in public became proof of something tyrants throughout history have never understood. Some truths are worth more than life itself. They destroyed his body, but they could never erase his truth.